have one, because you've got the original one that was the one that you spoke of before. You know, the original. I think it was written on
I'm talking about
and that stuff. You know, the preserved stuff.
What was written already.
Right,
so every reading that we have today, they have to go in line with this mushaf, the mushaf that was agreed upon by the Muslim community.
Right.
Yeah.
So if it's slightly different, then that one's wrong.
No, listen.
Sorry.
Every reading that is authentic to us, they have to be in line with this mushaf or the copy that Uthman compiled and distributed. If it doesn't agree with it, it's not acceptable to us.
Yeah, no, I'm not.
So that means
that
means I'm talking about the agreeing or disagreeing, any part.
Yeah, any part.
Anything that he brings, every example she brings, they will be in line with the script of this codex, if you want to call it, or the bound book, the mushaf. Okay. If it's not, then it's not an authentic reading.
So is the Quran like a component of books into one?
The Quran was, you see, that's why we need to tell you a bit more about the history. But because it's something perhaps you haven't heard at all.
No, definitely.
Very briefly, the Prophet allowed Muslims to recite in all these different forms. Sab'at Ahruf, called 7 different forms.
When you mean by different forms, different language forms?
No. The forms comprises of the examples I've given you, 2 already. One could be the word-order differences.
Okay,
one could be the grammatical inflection, whether it's...
but the other way around.
Yeah. So, you've already found 2...
But then which one's right?
Yeah, no.
Did you get what I mean?
Listen. If it comes from the Prophet, both of them are right. So that's why I'm saying, all the 10 readings, someone's smoking hashish or something, right? You can smell it. If the reading is from the Prophet, authentically transmitted, it's Quran. No doubt whatsoever. Every Muslim will accept it, and they do. So, why the difference arose is because the Prophet allowed or gave them the provision and the flexibility of some people, and I mentioned about the linguistic nuances of certain tribes. Arabs, they had several tribes within them. Each tribe had the linguistic nuances, meaning some of them would not have a particular word in their vocabulary. They can't use it, they can't utter it, they're not accustomed to it, for example. So, if that particular word was revealed in Quranic ayah or Quranic sentence, and it was done in another dialect, for them, what is that? So the Prophet would allow even synonyms within the dialect.
Right.
But again, from Allah, this is revelation. Right? So for example, suf and ahin means wool. Suf al-manfush or ahin al-manfush. Okay? To give you an example. So some of the tribes would not be able to pronounce it, use it. That's not part of their vocabulary. Okay? What are you talking about? But they would other synonym acceptable. So even these differences were allowed so that people can understand the message of the Quran. Again, this is from revelation, not someone making it up by themselves. If it's a revelation, we accept it. This is the only book that you can find that as far as I know, on planet Earth, that Allah has given within this flexibility to make the people understand the Quran.
Can I ask you a question? I've always thought though, why didn't the Quran be preserved in its original way?
That is the original way.
Hold on once again. Which was to recite it. I mean, like, to then write it down, it then leaves it open for interpretation, depending on how a person reads.
Briefly then, how the Quran was compiled, right?
But just to go back to my original point though, why did it have to get written down? Why couldn't it just continue to have been recited?
It is continuously being recited.
No, but it's been written down.
But it's also being recited.
No, but I understand that, but I'm saying...
It's a double method of preservation. It's written down also so that when you recite something and when you want to transcribe it down for help and ease of memorization, because not everyone memorizes, even though many people do. But some people want to memorize by looking at it, reading it. So when you start writing it, how are you going to write something when it's recited with sounds? Sounds with elongation, sounds with intonations, technical terms. Like, let me give you an example. فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالْخُنَّسِ Now you write it down and let him write it down, let him write it down. You'll find you've written it down differently. And if I say, can we read it back to me? If I say not you, because you've heard it, right? 3 other people, can you read it back to me? Do you think they will read it back to me exactly the way I recite it?
I don't think so.
Exactly. Because the transcription does not account for the elongation of the sound that I made, the nunation. Khunnas. You will not even get that. How much? 2 seconds, 1 second? It will be very difficult. So what they did, they transcribed it, and with each copy, it was taught by a Quran reader, a Qari. They will have to learn from this, but at least they know this is how to write it. And this is how you should recite it. Later on, as the script developed, as the language of writing developed, they started vowelizing and putting all these things. Now you can have the Mus'haf, the Quran, with color codings saying you, if it's this color, you make it 4 seconds long. If it's this green color, you make ghunna. Yeah? So this is called Tajweed Quran. So things like this are being facilitated now, and it's been constantly developed. So what we are saying is the Quran is an oral recital, for sure, but it has also been written down for a reason. Okay, and so one of the reasons I've given you exactly. So that when you want to read from it, then there are not several different readings. We know precisely this is what happened before. When there was no uniform acceptance of how to write it, the companions who were the recipients of the Quran, they were writing it as much as they are able to from their understanding of writing.
Would this have been God's word to write it down? And
The Quran says Allah has taught us the pen by the pen. The very first few revelation was, He taught by pen. The first few 5 or 4 few ayat that was revealed was read in the name of your Lord who created. And then within this is this, okay, He taught you by the pen. So the importance of writing is already very paramount in the Quran. In fact, the Quran says, even if you're doing a transaction between 2 parties, even they be little or big, write it down, get it witnessed. So writing is a paramount place in Islam.
Also another meaning. Qalam here in this ayah could also mean a taqlim. Taqlim means to analyze, because God revealed this book and He revealed this message for us to analyze everything, to know everything. This is how mankind understands, by analyzing. The word qalam.
Iktatabaha, and he recites it, in the morning and the evening. They used to accuse the Prophet. The Quran says, okay, he gets it written down and it being recited in the morning and the evening. So even the Quran that is being written down. So when the people were writing down, they were writing down within the best of their ability of the script that they're familiar with. There are only a few people who could read and write at that time. The Arabs were not a literate nation. Only few people who could read and write. Okay? So those who could read and write, they could write. Again, there will be differences between how they're writing it. And what's stopping them also from writing down the exegesis or the commentaries that they've heard, what it means. And we now have evidence from documentary evidence from the Quranic manuscripts, which has been reused, so we can see the underwriting, okay? That has been washed away because that's no longer relevant. People have even earlier than they rewrote again the Quran. So the underwriting, we can see people are saying, okay, in this surah, don't say Bismillah and they carry on. Not in the footnote, within the same text. But that sentence is not part of the Quran, but they've added it there for their own interpretation. Imagine that was copied, and it was copied and given to someone. They might think this is part of the Quran, because it's not embedded in a footnote on the side or a margin, but embedded within the text.
But where's the original scriptures?
So what happened is this: once all of these were being recited, so on, Muslims were at one point in the Battle of Armenia. At one point, when Islam spread, new Muslims are coming into the religion, and they're hearing this recitation recited in several of these forms, and they were saying, my recitation is better than yours. Not that yours is not Quran, mine is not Quran, but mine is better than yours. And they would start quarreling, and that didn't seem right to one of the governors. He went
so there could even be a change in the recitement then, when you're reciting it, because they're both reciting the same thing, but one saying that he thinks that his recitement is better than...
Did I give you 2 examples already?
Yeah.
But now they are saying, Hamalna, the example, if I'm assuming this is correct, or Humilna, he will say, no, mine is better. So the quarrel quarreling only happened because of these new Muslims who have now come to Islam without the proper etiquette of knowing that this is, you shouldn't do that. Both of them is from the Quranic recital.
But which one do they recite? I know they're both, and they're both legit, but then which one?
Recite whichever is better for you, whichever is easier for you, whichever you want to recite, whichever you wish. Whichever you wish. So then the need arose at that time. This was the second crisis. There was another crisis before when it was compiled first. This is the second compilation where, so they said, no, we're going to now write and unite the Muslim under one mushaf, or one read. So mushafs were written in such a way to accommodate all these readings as much as possible. So they left deliberately even the diacritical marks to distinguish between consonants. So this humilna and hamalna, even though they're the same consonants, without the vowelization, you can read from the same script in both ways. Okay? If they applied the vowels, then of course you can't. You can only read in one way. But the original compilation by Uthman, in his compilation, was done in such a way that you can read in both ways. Sometimes there was a reading, like if I said, for example, I don't know an example of a one preceding another word. For example, suppose the word was the differences. Of course, you can't have it under one particular script. There has to be two different scripts, right? So we know examples like this where wa wassa and wa awsa. Yeah, wa wassa and wa awsa. There's a sound. There's an alif, hamza in there. Because this was an acceptable reading taught by the Prophet, so how do you accommodate that in the same book, copy? You can't. So what he did, Uthman, he copied wa awsa in one mushaf and sent it to the people there around the regions where they were reading this reading, they're familiar. And the other reading to where? To Shah, say to Basra, to Shah, to the places now. If I say Sham, that would be like Iraq, and then this region to Mecca and to Kufa, places like this. So we know, because we now have manuscripts to differentiate. Yes, there are manuscripts from these different regions with this. We can clearly see manuscripts in, say, in a British Library is one of them. That manuscripts, we're comparing with a Paris manuscript or manuscript in Sana'a. We can clearly see. I have examples like this, right?
I perfectly can accept that.
So the point is, these differences were well established from the very beginning. These differences are acceptable because it's all part of Quran and it isn't transmitted meticulously to us.
Yes. I understand what you're saying, like, like it could be slightly changed, but it both means the same thing. Yeah?
So the differences.
What I'm saying is that if you were to self-confess that, then it would be okay. But I mean, if you're saying that it's 100% accurate and there is no changes whatsoever, so for example, the original, you're saying like, I'm going to change the word so that better may he understand it. But even though it means the same thing, I'm going to change it so that he understands it. But the original script, what did it say? Was it like his version or was it his version? When you say original
script, remember, there is no original script. The Quran was revealed in the original... The recital. When it was recital, so sometime, for example, say it was revealed in, of course, in 7 ahruf. Okay? Yeah. So which is the first one? So it's not about first one and second one. The Prophet taught different companions different ahruf. For example, which she alluded to earlier on. Surah Al-Furqan, chapter number 25 of the Quran. Okay? One of the companions was reciting in his prayer. Another companion, the one who was reciting was Hisham bin Hakim. The other companion that came was Umar bin al-Khattab. He came and he heard this recital. He immediately recognized that this was Surah number 25, Surah Furqan of the Quran. But he heard him reciting not the way that he's learned. So he felt like stopping him. Yeah. But he said, okay, I'm going to wait till he finishes prayer. And then ask him, who taught you this chapter? This is the Prophet. So he said, no, the Prophet taught me differently. So there was a dispute between them. He said, okay, let's go to the Prophet and find out. So they went both to the Prophet, and the Prophet then said, okay, Hisham, you recite. He recited, and the Prophet said, this is how it was revealed. This to Umar, you recite. Umar recited the way that he learned from the Prophet. He says, this is how it was revealed. So now you have the Prophet endorsing both of these recitations. When this recitation had slight differences, recognizable differences. So hamalna and humilna is a recognizable difference, right? Okay. So the point to notice this, the differences that was allowed for flexibility of the people to come to know the Quran and understand the Quran and know the meaning of it, they do not contradict the meaning at all. Never contradict, but they're always complementary. Complementary. So an example which is used from the very first chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Fatiha, Maliki and Maliki. Did you notice the difference?
Yeah.
Maliki and one is Maliki.
Yes.
But they have difference of meanings. But look at the differences of meaning. One of them means king. Other one means the owner.
Okay.
Yeah? So are they contradictory in meaning? Because if you're the owner, king is the owner of his lands, his dominion. He's also, so they are complementary meaning by themselves.
I agree with you there, but at the same time though, depending on who's reading a king and an owner, they can see it in two different ways.
Yeah,
because one can see a king as a ruler.
But the contextual meaning does not change. Still it says Maliki Yawmiddin, God is the Malik or Malik of the Day of Judgment. Mm-hmm. Now, what does it mean? That he is the king of the Day of Judgment? Okay. He's the owner of the Day of Judgment? What differences of understanding have we got from there?
No, but what I'm saying to you is that the king,
go on. What's the big difference?
The king and the owner.
You don't know what I'm talking about.
The king and the owner both can have similarities, I agree. Mm-hmm. But they can both be different as well.
No, from this example, if we say
king and an owner.
if we say God is the owner of the Day of Judgment, then we know that the Day of Judgment belongs to God. He's the one who's going to judge. If we say God is the king of the Day of Judgment, there's no other one else. There's none else. Then he is the one who's doing the judgment.
Yeah, but I'm saying, but then which one? So then the people that interpret it as the owner, they are reading it incorrectly.
No. The meaning which is trying.
No, but I'm saying that they're both different. Owner and king are different.
I am saying.
In English, you're finding the difference, yeah? Of king and owner. A person who understands Arabic here has no issue whatsoever. I understand what you're saying. In English, a king and an owner to you is a massive difference, but English lacks.
And in the Arabic, how we just pronounce it, they're not two words. One goes Maliki, I think, and the other one is Maliki.
Yes, I know, I understand. But the person who's listening to that in Arabic, they have no issue with the understanding of that word. We in English might have an issue.
Can I ask in Arabic though, if you own a shop, for instance, is it the same word, or how do you differentiate then?
No, you would say Maliki, innit? If you the thinking, and the king is Maliki. So there has to be a difference,
yeah. But we're talking about the contextual meaning. Yeah. So if God is the king of the Day of Judgment and the owner of the Day of Judgment, what is it telling us ultimately?
But was there any property back then? Did anybody have private?
When somebody says, this is again another miraculous aspect of the Quran, when God is described as the king of the Day of Judgment, the Arabs had no concept of being owner or king of any time periods. You can't own time. Look at it. You can't be the owner of time. Yeah. I don't own time. So when God is the owner of time or the king of time, the time is under his control. And we're talking about not just ordinary time. The time, the Yawm, which is the Day of Judgment. So the meaning, even though there are, you can see the slight, meaning differences, nuances, but the message is understood. And we have both of them. So our reading has come, not just one reading, whatever the text has accommodated, we've got all of them. So if you're only familiar with one, you might have one sense, but you understand the meaning. If you know all of this 10 qira'ah, then you also don't know the meaning, but perhaps you know the complementary meaning to it. Yeah. Okay? So it's complementary.
But that's what I'm saying. If I'm learning to be a Muslim, for example,
yeah,
and I read the part where it's owner, I haven't read it as it being a king, I've read it as owner. But then I speak to another brother now, me and him are talking, and he says it, but he says it as king. Right now we're going to come to a confusion, because I'm thinking it as an owner, he's thinking as a king. I know you're saying in the Arabic it's considered the same, and like you would know the difference, but then it's leaving it open for interpretation that someone that is not from that background and someone that then wants to come in and learn. If someone wants to come in and learn,
now imagine your brothers come to you, discuss it. what's the difference of understanding from this context that you got? God is the owner of the Day of Judgment or the King of the Day of Judgment. Now, you're disagreeing like they did earlier time in the Battle of Armenia. Muslim soldiers fighting, and then when they're reciting the Quran, they said, my reading is better than yours. Now, what I want to know from you, what differences of understanding do you get from the context?
Straight away, I would say an owner is underneath a king. I would say an owner is underneath a king.
So when God is the owner of the Day of Judgment, he's not the judge in that day?
No, if you're saying he's an owner, I'm saying other people can be given owners. But say, for example,
the Day of Judgment, right? Day of Judgment.
But I'm saying, like, when you're talking about owners, there could be many owners, but there'll only be one king.
Missing some point.
Okay,
when God is described the only owner of the Day of Judgment, no one else, the only king of the Day of Judgment, okay? If God is described that, there is no other king and there is no other owner. So, who's doing the judgment?
No, I understand what you're saying, where you're giving him the specific title as owner, but I'm saying other people will have that title too. Because if people own some cattle...
We're not talking about other people, we're not talking about other contexts.
No, but this is what I'm trying to say.
We're talking about within the context of the Quran, when these different readings are transmitted from the Prophet ﷺ.
Yeah.
Not a general usage of the word. We're talking about the Quran. So when you read the Quran, do you get a different meaning?
Saying that they both mean the same thing.
Yes.
You understand?
They complement each other.
And I'm saying to you, it does go both ways. Because you know when you're saying they complement each other, you're only saying they complement each other because they go both ways.
Because they're accepted.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's just a linguistic nuance. The ultimate meaning within the context is what you've understood, that here God is in the control of the judgment. He will do the judgment. And that's why when the next ayah goes, the believers say, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينَ. That, to you, it is you that we worship and you that we seek for help.
I actually agree with you, yeah? Because we're just being silly for arguing about owners and kings. Yeah, I get it. I get exactly what you're trying to say.
I'm the owner of my house.
Yeah, I understand what you're trying to say. But then we leave it with basically saying, then don't say it's perfect. Because there's one part that's saying owner, another part that's saying king. But then in another term, you're saying that there's nothing that's changed. Nothing has changed, but it has.
What's changed?
Because there's a meaning in one way that's saying owner, and there's a meaning in another way that's saying king. Now, I know what you're saying, they both mean the same thing.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, this is a revelation that God sent.
Yes.
Of the one Quran, which he's describing himself as a king and as an owner.
Right, so when he sent it, did he send it say Maliki or did he send it say Maliki? Which one did he send?
I have just explained to you earlier on.
Yeah, I know.
He taught some companions one reading, another companion another reading. That means someone was taught Maliki, other was taught Maliki.
Maliki, but I accept that. But what I'm saying to you is he's been given it first.
It's not about first and second.
No, I'm saying
the Quran.
Did God give it to everyone or did God reveal it to Muhammad?
God revealed it to Prophet Muhammad.
Right, so when he revealed it to Prophet Muhammad, before Prophet Muhammad revealed it to anybody else, how did Prophet Muhammad interpret it?
Yeah, so what you're asking is this: which of this reading came first? Right?
Yes.
But what we're saying is, this is not any significant to us. Why? Because all of this reading that Prophet taught at different times throughout his life until he left the whole of the Quran is what we are talking about. So the Quran that he's left, the final reading that he left, is the Quran that we are reading today. Okay? So if now we have Maliki and Maliki, we take both. We are not interested in which one was first, which one was second, because both of them are revelation for us to understand.
I mean, I can accept it. Like I said, I can accept
Fair
it.
enough.
I've just always gone to the impression that there is no different, like Maliki and Maliki. You've taught me that. Do you understand? I didn't know that. From what I've always, when I speak to Muslim brothers, they tell me that there is nothing in the Quran that is different. There's one Quran. There's not 2 or 3 or 4. There's only one Quran, only one interpretation of anything.
Nobody said interpretation. So, are you talking about translation?
Oh, translation. I might be using the word wrong. Okay, let's say in the Arabic format then. Yeah? Because that's how it's originally been given, yeah? Its original state is in Arabic format. So, again, when I
where is Hatun? She's supposed to come back, right?
Quran, that nothing is changed, nothing is altered, nothing is slightly different. If anything's slightly different, then the person in the back will say, "Oh, you've just said that wrong." So if he says Maliki, but the person in the back says you should say Maliki,
because it's been accepted, brother. It's an accepted
so
mode. That's what you've missed, I think.
It's interesting. When we go to prayer, say in a mosque in London, right, Regent's Park Mosque, an imam who recites in Warsh, Maliki, when he recites it, you're not going to find people saying wrong, right? Because they know this is an accepted reading, authentic reading from the Prophet, which is Quran. So if you went to Morocco, you'll probably hear this reading. But if you come here and he reads, some people, I agree, some people might think, but they will then have to, these are the people who don't know the readings, okay? There might be lots of people who don't know the readings. And this is why Muslims need to learn about their religion.
I mean, if I was a Muslim and he was speaking of the God that I believe in and he was to use the owner prescription, I would correct him and say, no, he should be a king.
Is it because you would
I know you're accepting the version, but I would still correct him.
You would have corrected him with your lack of knowledge about the accepted modes. That's the basis, brother.
Yeah, but I mean only on the basis
that's lack of knowledge. If a person, because there's scholars who pray behind scholars. No scholar will correct him if it's a different mode. He knows it's an acceptable mode because the modes don't change the meaning. That's the simple fact.
Anyway,
I understand that.
And I understand your point. I mean, I've given you an example from historical past where the Muslim soldiers were reading each other and they were actually discussing this and arguing with each other. My reading is better than yours.
Exactly,
so this is what was trying to. So the mushafs that we have, they are transcribed, as I said. You can read both of these readings. So the examples that she had, I asked her, can she give me a copy of this so I can go through all the examples and give her a feedback. Okay. I have a few already from their lectures here. Okay. They only like to lecture themselves without having a proper discussion with someone who wants to talk about it. As you can see, was she really interested to talk about it? I don't know why, right? Because I was going to show you. So I have examples that they have done, and I can show you from the script. It's the same script, and you can read it all the different ways. Same script.
So can I ask you another question then? Where is the original script?
So when you say original, there are many earlier copies that has survived. Okay.
No, but I mean the original